Okay, here we are with the second half of the Unit 1 foundational period for AP World History. We've been talking about Mesopotamians and some of the spread of empire, Sargon of Akkad, Hammurabi, some of those. We ended here with the Hittites coming in out of Central Asia, these nomadic peoples that brought the chariot and iron technology, which made them very formidable opponents to the Mesopotamians. Now, who came in after them were a very impressive group called the Assyrians, and these people are you want to associate with them their technology, war technology. They're very well known for being cruel, and they were able to float across rivers on inflated sheep bladders. They would tunnel under walls when people built walls to keep them out. They'd tunnel under them and have the walls destroyed that way. But they also had like the world's largest library at the time. So they were kind of, unique in that way. They had one there. Nineveh was their capital. Nebuchadnezzar was probably their high point king. And what else do we need to know here? Lydians. Now, the Lydians, Phoenicians, they're going to be in northern Africa, right there along the Mediterranean Sea. And with the Lydians, really the only thing you need to remember about them is that they invented the use of coined money. Prior to this, of course, trade was barter. You would trade an item for another item. With the coining of money, then things would be universal. It was a lot easier to facilitate trade. Very important, so keep that in mind. Now, the Phoenicians, a couple of important things with the Phoenicians. We remember the Phoenicians for their phonetic alphabet, where you had letters that represented sounds, and you could put the sounds together. It made language a lot more easy to learn. The Hebrews, the Phoenicians also were known for their sailing. You can see here a relief of a sailing ship. The Phoenicians were some of the world's greatest sailors in history. And they also gave us a red-purple dye that they extracted from these snails native to the region. It took about 60,000 snails to produce a pound of dye. So their fabric was so incredibly expensive that only the wealthy could afford it. And so you started seeing like the Caesars and Rome and stuff that this was purple becomes the color of royalty. Okay, and here you see some Lydian stuff. Coin money. Phoenicians, some ruins here with the Phoenicians, and shows some Phoenician dress. Now, the Hebrews are very unique. They are a monotheistic group. They're in the Mesopotamian region. So when everyone else is worshiping multiple gods, these random people, these Hebrews, are very adamant that there's only one God, Yahweh. A couple of famous Hebrews, of course, were Abraham, who we had the first covenant with, that the Hebrews would worship God and he chose them as his people. And the second covenant there with Moses and the Ten Commandments. The Hebrews are very important. They're going to get kicked out of many areas. They're going to have a rough history. The Jews will. But they are important in that they will influence the later monotheistic religions that come along, such as Christianity and Islam. Now, Egypt, remember that this river dynasty is founded among the Nile River. And the Nile River is an incredibly important river and a great river, the gift of the Nile, Herodotus said. The Nile River, it flows south to north and empties into the Mediterranean, but the winds blow from north to south. And so it's very easy to trade along the river. You can put your sail up and use the winds and go against the current, or on the way back, you could put down the sail and just use the currents to get you home. Also, the Nile floods like clockwork. The Egyptians they could always predict when it was going to flood, which meant that there were no surprising, devastating floods that killed crops, which ended up killing a lot of people, like along the Yellow River and other places. Egyptians were known, of course, for their hieroglyphics, their writing style. They also had a Coptic style that come in later on that was a little more efficient. While the hieroglyphics looked pretty, they weren't very efficient when you compare it to things like phonetics. With the Egyptians, you had three kingdoms. You had the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The Old Kingdom is when like the Great Pyramids were built and stuff. The Egyptians were great monument builders in this time period, to basically show off their wealth, to show off their power. Some of the Egyptian achievements, things like the obelisk here. They had a fantastic engineering abilities. They were also a theocracy, meaning that their government was run by their religion. The leader, of course, was the pharaoh, the god king, who was supposedly a god on earth. Now, you got to know King Menes. He is the man responsible for uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. For a long time, it was divided up into those two regions. He's going to unite the two regions together, sometimes called Narmer, the Scorpion King. Pharaohs had immense power, especially in the old kingdom. Egyptian women are special in that they had more authority and more power themselves. You even had a couple of female Egyptian rulers, most notably Hatshepsut, who ruled in place of her when her husband was killed in battle. She ruled in place of her stepson, who wasn't old enough, Thutmose III, who wasn't old enough to rule. So she even wore like a fake beard and stuff, and took on male mannerisms and whatnot to, so that she felt male to the Egyptian people. But in Egyptian society, the women had more divorce rights. They had more property rights than you saw in Mesopotamia and China and the Indus River Valley. So if you were a woman in this time period, Egypt was the place to be. Now, in the Indus Valley civilizations, a lot less is known about them. They have a written language, but it's one that's never been deciphered. The main things you need to know about the Indus Valley civilization, again, you see a couple city-states. We have excavated here Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. You're talking 40, 50,000 people in these cities. They were built very well, though. They were built in grid-like patterns. It was easy to navigate them. They had things like sewage. They were very advanced. But at some point, people left those cities, and we don't really know why. There are several different possibilities, but many believe that there was ecological disaster that led to people having to flee the city because it's harder to feed 50,000 people. It's easier for people to go off in different directions and survive. Now, here with China, this would start with the Zhou dynasty, but in the foundational period, we really have three Chinese dynasties we want to talk about: the Xia, the Shang, and the Zhou. The Xia were almost mythological, but they're important. They're going to help dam the Yellow River. The Chinese dynasties, they rise up in two river systems: the Yellow River, also known as China's Sorrow, because the Yellow River is an unpredictable and mighty river, and it's killed millions of people over the years. And the other was the Yangtze River. And so you kind of had two separate ones. But eventually, after the Xia, you would get the Shang. The Shang were known for monopolizing copper, bronze. And so only the rich could afford to fight, because only the rich could afford the bronze weapons. And the bronze weapons were far superior than stone weapons, of course. The Zhou dynasty comes a little bit later. They're going to leave records, of course, written on bamboo and things like that. But you're going to get written language and stuff like that with the Zhou. The Zhou also formulate something called the Mandate of Heaven, which basically is just a social justification for why a ruling family is ruling. It follows the dynasty that you are ruling because the gods favor you, because you are favored by the gods. And the mandate of heaven falls within the dynastic cycle. And the dynastic cycle says that, at some point there will be raids, there will be taxes being raised, there will be natural disasters, and this will lead to a loss of the mandate of heaven and will justify the overthrow of that dynasty by a new one. All right. The Chinese were very big on having bureaucracies to run their affairs. Remember that bureaucrats are basically the government workers who see that things get done. Now, Buddhism is really talked more in the next period, but founded by Siddhartha Gautama. It is going to challenge Hinduism for a while in India, but eventually it will leave India and go to China and places like that, and Japan. We ran out of time again. All right. I think this is going to get you the vast majority of the foundational period. Thanks.